Saint Ignatius of Loyola was a Spanish soldier born in the late 1400s. He was seriously wounded in battle, and while recovering from his injuries, he underwent a deep spiritual conversion. Soon he was spending 7 hours a day in prayer, and in a cave in Manresa, Spain, he began writing what would eventually become known as the Ignatian spiritual exercises.
Well, Saint Ignatius, I always say he was a genius. In the spiritual exercises were really inspired to him. He tells that Our Lady herself inspired him, the book of the spiritual exercises.
The spiritual exercises are guided meditations, prayers, and instructions undertaken over the course of 30 days. They had a huge impact on Catholic spirituality throughout the Middle Ages and well into modern times. Ignatius also started the Society of Jesus, the Jesuit missionary order.
When Saint Ignatius first introduced the spiritual exercises, that's also what helped Catholicize South America and much of North America. For the Jesuit martyrs like St. Isaac Jogues, the spiritual exercises was the source of that fire that those missionaries had and that brought the faith to our country.
And the exercises have helped millions of other Catholics, both religious and lay people, for centuries. Even today, the Ignatian spiritual exercises, commonly condensed to 3 days over a weekend, play a significant role in the spiritual lives of many Catholics all over the world. And one of the biggest proponents of the spiritual exercises in the 20th century was another Jesuit, Father John Hardon. Father Hardon, officially declared a servant of God by the Catholic Church in 2002, was born in Pittsburgh in 1914, but grew up in Cleveland.
There are two significant influences in the life of Father Hardon. The first, obviously, was his family. His father died when he was 1 year old. He was working on a construction site on scaffolding, and he went to help a co-worker, and he fell from the scaffolding and was killed instantly.
Young John Hardon was guided by his mother to a very strong faith in God.
And his mother, Anna, had formed a deeply Catholic home for their son, and Anna devoted herself completely to the son. She never remarried. She made many sacrifices in order that Father could have a good Catholic education.
He was drawn to the Jesuits from a young age, and throughout his whole life had a devotion to the spiritual exercises.
But then the second major influence would be the Society of Jesus, which at the time in which he entered it was a real bulwark of the Catholic Church.
Father proved to be a devout and enthusiastic Jesuit.
The Father was thoroughly imbued with that dedication, love of Christ in the Church, and therefore deep love of the Vicar of Christ on earth, the Holy Father.
Due to health reasons, he was not allowed to be a missionary, but was present in spirit. And he employed his extensive knowledge of Far East traditions and customs in training Jesuit missionaries for that purpose.
He received his doctorate in sacred theology at the Gregorian University in Rome, I think in 1951, if I'm not mistaken. And he went on to in a number of teaching positions and then also as a prolific writer.
At the request of Pope Paul VI in 1975, Father Hardon wrote the book, The Catholic Catechism. Years later, Father worked with Pope John Paul II and also then Cardinal Ratzinger on the Holy See's official Catechism of the Catholic Church, which was published in 1992. In his later years, he was an important resource to two popes, many cardinals, bishops, priests, sisters, and a countless number of lay people who attended his retreats and talks and studied his work. He was summoned to Rome several times to help with or lead various apostolic efforts.
He was called by the Holy Father to Rome and asked to give the rest of his life helping to restore the Catholic faith in the United States, in the Americas.
He founded a number of apostolates where he saw the great need for a committed body of laity to devote themselves to promoting the life of the Church,
including what became known as the Marian Catechist Apostolate, which grew from a catechetical program he had helped develop for Mother Teresa and her missionaries of charity. And the spiritual exercises were a crucial aspect of training for this important work. And as Father Hardon knew death was approaching, he was unsure who would take over this spiritual responsibility.
Well, I had begun to work with Father Hardon in 1997 on the Marian Catechist Apostolate, which he was developing. And Father Hardon was getting up in the years, and also he was not well, and he was looking for some reliable priests would be able to give the Ignatian exercises. And he discovered this young community founded in Argentina called Christi.
Father Iannuzzi hadn't met him personally, but he had known of him. He knew about his catechism and so forth. So he knew Father Hardon by the works that Father Hardon had done. And when we came here, one of the things we had to do was to meet with Father Hardon, apart from other priests.
I had the opportunity to speak with Father Hardon, who, in a certain way, decided to give a test to me about my knowledge about our congregation.
Well, he scrutinized us, yeah.
He just simply didn't want anyone involved with the apostolates who wasn't a solid person, or he didn't want anyone involved who wasn't going to be completely Christ-centered.
He asked me particularly about the issue of poverty, how we leave the poverty, and if we had any personal property, which obviously we do not have.
He didn't want anyone involved who had his own agenda or who was drawing attention to himself instead of to Christ and to life in Christ. And so he was demanding.
And when he heard that we were called Miles Christi, that we were preaching retreats and spiritual exercises according to the method of Saint Ignatius, he was very impressed with that. And he said, well, I'd like to work with you people.
And I remember him telling me one day that he interviewed these two priests and that he gave them a thorough examination and that he found them to be worthy to do this work.
So that's where we met Father Hardon. He asked us to go with him to Chicago. He preached 5 retreats, but he got so sick that he was hospitalized. And 2 days before the retreat, he told us, okay, are you going to preach the retreat? So we said, okay, yeah, we're ready.
And yes, we helped him to preach the last spiritual exercises he was able to preach, and then he passed away.
He said to me, and I always remember his last words, he said, "Bishop, will you continue to work with me?" And that was right to the end. All he was thinking about was the work he was doing for Christ and would I continue to work with him.